a lot like that. Right. 12 participants.
You active, you have room, you want?
As long as we got some. Dan, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay,
Quick apology to those of you who have been waiting. Unfortunately, the computer decided it needed to do an update just as we started the meeting.
all right, well, thank you all for joining us. I'm gonna call this meeting to order at 7:12 p.m. Did all the members present receive, read, and have any issues with the minutes of the previous meeting?
I make a motion to accept the minutes as submitted.
Someone want to second that?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Unanimous vote in favor to accept the minutes as printed. Okay. Rob, I know we haven't done this in the past, but do we have any communications that we should be reading? Or I know I've been getting some emails, but I think the whole committee's been getting them, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
So we, should we be worried about reading or acknowledging them in
We can certainly acknowledge the receipt of the.
I think that, I don't think we want to read them all.
Yeah,
I
it's,
think we should- we
we
should
certainly-
that we're receiving emails.
yeah, we could do that. I don't think we're under any obligation to read it, but yeah, we certainly appreciate the fact that they are giving us their input and the letters are being read.
We have no obligation to read the letters during the meeting.
During the meeting. Okay, there you go.
And it is worthwhile to acknowledge during the meeting that we each have been reading all the letters that have been submitted.
Of course.
Okay, so.
Uh,
Go ahead, Rob, wait.
So the most, do you want to talk about the letters or?
Well, do you want to give us kind of maybe a listing of the letters? I mean, I'm not sure what the procedure should be here, so that's why I'm asking you. Should we, I mean, we're acknowledging that we've all been, if anyone that has sent letters of any description to the committee email address, we've all receiving them. I'm assuming we're all reading them.
Yes, we received a letter from Rebecca Dalby. Nope, I'm sorry. Hold on, back up. Well, we did receive one from her, but that was back a couple of weeks ago.
We got one just recently.
And we got one just today, yeah.
Christie's.
Maybe, yes.
And then we got one today from. Christie,
Yeah, right, that was today's, right?
yes. Yeah,
I guess I just want to acknowledge that we've received them,
yeah,
so that people aren't thinking that we're ignoring it.
yeah, yeah, Sarah Christie was today, and we received a letter from Mr. Kent
Yes.
yesterday, I believe, voicing his support for short-term rentals. And I
When
think
was our last meeting?
that was July 20 something,
Oh, no.
August rather, August. No, we skipped August, July something, 23rd maybe, whatever the minutes said.
Yeah, 23rd maybe.
The 25th, we got the copy of sample bylaws.
7/26.
26th, we received a letter from one of my guests, from Natasha M.
Oh, yeah. That was,
On the 10th, we received communication from Diane about the public record request. we received a email from Dean, I believe his name was, questioning, directed to Wayne about a stay for next year for a wedding his family had made. Question on the next meeting date. Some meeting minutes, Mr. Alex Kent.
So everybody's been getting these, we're all,
Getting them,
Right.
reading them, taking them under advisement.
got it. All right, so let's pick up where we left off.
Wayne, I've got a few things
Go
that
ahead.
I looked into while we were having our vacation that I want to talk about if we can.
Absolutely.
I'll make it as brief as possible. First off, an update. We had looked at surrounding communities and what they're currently doing to manage their short-term rentals. The question of our immediate neighbors has come up a number of times, and I just want to update us as far as what that looks like. Revere has a pretty extensive web page with their rules and regulations, and basically they're focused, as are so many of the others, on resident, family, and adjacent, no more than 6 adults. That's Revere. Okay, so it's again, they want it to be with a resident family. Lynn, resident, family, and adjacent, which would be a 2-family, something along those lines. You know, the resident family, and they rent out the place next to them, the other half of. Let's see, Manchester by the sea, owner occupied 6-day maximum stay. They're unusual in that regard. Let's see. Marblehead. Borders shall be considered an accessory use. Owner occupied dwelling, no more than 5 boarders in 3 rooms shall be allowed in any dwelling unit. Not allowed if not listed in table use for zone. Swampscott. Limited to tourist lodging overlay district. They've created an overlay district. That two actually small ones. One off of Humphrey Street and one over by where the old hotel used to be, over by the beach years ago.
Yeah, okay.
So let's see, tourist lodging overlay district, on-site management at all times, only private owner occupied residence, up to 4 bedrooms, but no more than 50% gross floor area. So that closes the loop as far as what our neighbors are doing. Something I also wanted to update, I had talked back in April about the registration of short-term rentals in Nahant and how many we had and how many that we probably should have. Want to let you know that Nahant back then had 19 registered short-term rentals. We now have 39 registered
That sounds.
Short-term
more
rentals.
realistic.
at 105% over what we had back in April. And there are some that were on the missing list back then that have now been added. And there are some that were on the missing list back then that have not been added. So the growth rate, I think, is significant.
I'm not sure it was the actual growth there. I think the reporting rate is probably going up.
There's certainly an improvement in that regard also. If we had everything that we should have had back at that time frame, we would have had 30. Now we're up to 39. We're ahead of Swampscott, who has 37.
37 ranges.
37 registered.
Those are counted. How did you count those? I know some members on the planning board counted Airbnb, added it to Verbo.
That's just coming off of the Department of Revenue list, downloaded right off the Department of Revenue website.
So you would never get a duplicate. When something's registered, it's registered. It doesn't matter what the venue, what the.
Right, yeah, a state registry should have them.
Right, exactly. So that's why we wanted to use that. We don't want to just try to count ads in an online.
Well, the
Not that
problem,
you couldn't, but
yeah,
that's not,
it's, you know, we've obviously had discussions about how could they be on Airbnb if they're not on the DOR? And they are. Yeah, we have grown. We have improved our listing rate, but as I said, there are some that were missing back then that are still missing now. But we've improved.
so we have some that we know exist, but they're still not listed on.
It's still not listed on the DOR. Yeah,
But I thought that was the requirement of the Airbnb,
that was,
like they have to give
Exactly.
on the state registration.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
so somewhere along the line, there's
we know.
something that's not quite going on as.
Let me put it this way, that if you go to YouTube and Google something along the line of how to beat requirements for listing on Airbnb,
Okay,
you'll see some videos. Okay,
Alright.
so it's out there, and we're not alone in that regard. I flipped an article here regarding Buffalo. Where they only have, let's see, this is August 20th. They only have 50 properties listed on their registry, but they know they have at least 913. So it's, yeah.
Buffalo is not Nahant.
Buffalo.
but it's an example.
Well,
of
I'm-
Well, leading to my question about Nahant. Do we have an idea of how many are missing? Unaccounted for?
There were 11 when I did it back in April. That I could, just by looking and identifying the properties based on their listing on VRBO and Airbnb. I don't know, I didn't do it again this time.
I think that sounds reasonable, given our numbers.
Yeah, yeah. But just again, to show the difficulties and that's my point here, is showing the difficulties in managing these things. Cambridge and Boston both have strict rules as far as no whole house rentals. But it's estimated that Boston that has, you know, they've got 4,900 listings, and at least they're saying 652 of them are whole house rentals.
Well, just because somebody makes a rule doesn't mean someone else is going to abide by it.
Well, and again, I'm speaking strictly to the difficulty in managing these things. And I'm looking at, I don't know who's going to get that honor. But it's in the room. The object of the conversation is that it's you obviously, you know better than anybody, you've got your work cut out for you. I mean, the
I
comment,
totally understand that.
yeah, the comment was made last meeting about how difficult and nearly impossible it's been as far as illegal apartments in town, and I believe that problem still exists, so.
And I'm pretty sure, and I don't know any, you know, like specific addresses, but I can almost guarantee at least a few of these Airbnb listings are, you know, were illegal apartments to begin with,
Right,
which is another issue if depending on how we formulate the requirement to register, if indeed this all goes into some registration process here in town, is what exactly are you actually registering as the you know, what dwelling unit are we registering as an Airbnb?
Mhm.
I mean, certainly,
What's its actual status?
right, it has to be a legitimate dwelling unit first, then the Airbnb second,
Yeah.
not
Right.
some illegal apartment first, and then now suddenly an Airbnb unit. It doesn't, you making it an Airbnb doesn't make it kosher, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Sure. So the next thing I wanted to touch on has been lots of back and forth as far as the Stiller decision and how it might impact Nahant as far as whether or not they're legal here per se.
Go ahead.
And I absolutely agree that there is confusion in that to some degree, unless you really break it down piece by piece. And that's what I did. And I'm now focusing solely on principal use. We've had discussions about how our borders and lodgers provision in the
Right.
in our own bylaws is picked up in a similar vein in the Stiller decision and focused on, the similarities between the two. That's in either case accessory use. That's not principal use. So I'm going to I set everything aside as far as the accessory use and the arguments in Stiller. And as far as principal use is concerned, the statement is very clear as far as the SJC saying that because the plaintiff's use of his property for short-term rental was not specifically permitted under the bylaw, we conclude that it was not a specifically permitted use, period. Now, that's pretty clear to me. And what's also clear to me is another decision that has not been challenged in Robert S. Lytle as Beach Avenue Realty Trust versus the Hull Zoning Board of Appeals.
Okay, I've seen that one. Go ahead.
Yeah, same thing, principal use. If it's not listed, it's not legal. Third one, back to Stiller again, but at the land court level, just the land court, same thing. If it's not listed, it's not legal. So I think there's a lot of unanimity there, and it fits our own definition, or I should say our own bylaw perfectly, because we have the exact same statement. We have it a couple of times. We have it in section 4, and we have it again in section 7, is it, under non-conforming use? I'm hoping that gives us at least some degree of comfort that that seems to be in agreement with at least my interpretation of what our bylaw says.
I can point out one big difference, Mr. Chairman, that is key.
Okay.
To the extent it's important, I'm not even quite sure Styler really is important to this board's mandate. To the extent you're discussing it, the Styler court specifically mentioned that the ordinances in Linfield allowed roomers and lodgers in residential districts, and I think business too, but really only residential, pursuant to a special, or pursuant to a permit from the ZBA. And that's something that is wholly different than our bylaws. So to read Styler as guiding us in an interpretation of our own bylaws is sort of a slippery slope. But that being said,
Principal use, Dan.
well, that being said, it doesn't really matter because you're not looking to determine whether current bylaws are allowing or not allowing short-term rentals. Your mandate is to create new draft bylaws.
In my concern here, Dan, is that the issue has come up several times.
Yeah.
And the response that we've heard has been confusing the plain language that we're reading.
Yeah. What issue keeps coming up?
Rather than get into all the other issues in the SJC decision, I'm focusing on that and the 2 land court decisions, all 3 of which say the same thing. It's not going to, you're right, it's not going to change what we're doing, but I want the town to hear that there may be less confusion here than we're being led to believe.
What issue are you saying keeps coming up?
The confusion that that Styler in the SJC decision is somehow been mitigated or confused by some of the opinions rendered toward the accessory use. That's why I separated out the primary use entirely. That's all I'm talking about here, and it's only to try and relieve some of the confusion that these meetings may have caused prior.
Okay. All right. Well, just realize your mandate is to create new draft bylaws, not really to look at the ones we haven't.
I understand that completely,
Okay.
but if I see this committee resulting in confusion in the community because of something that has been discussed here and the information has not been correctly presented, I want to try and clarify that because I don't want the community back on its heels as far as what the right and wrong information might be.
Okay.
And I think on that, I'd like to comment, and great resource to have Dan here. I think Linfield put a stop to it, and then the planning board passed a bylaw restricting the use of short-term rentals without having a special permit. And then Styler said, I should be grandfathered in, that's a use I had. And they ruled saying, no, that's not conforming to a single family zone residential area, that use, meaning this bylaw is in place and this bylaw is upheld. I don't think it was anything retroactive to the bylaw. I don't think it was in regards to the original decision to stop him. I think it was more moving forward, saying there's now a bylaw in place and you can't circumvent that. And again, the interesting part I found of that, it stipulated a single family residentially zoned area. It didn't stipulate if it was an in-law, if it was a legal apartment before then, so on and so
Well,
forth.
there was no dispute in that case that was just a single family home. There
The-
was
the-
never anything, there was no discussion of anything else, because that's just what was there.
I agree. I think the outcome would have been interesting if it was a two-family and he was renting one unit as a short-term rental and said, you know, this was a rental before, I rented it in this fashion. I don't think that the court said, no, that's not an allowable use for a single-family home. I think the court said, no, according to the current bylaws which are in place, which one of them just recently passed, that no longer conforms. Dan, is that-
Plaintiff claim permissible primary use as not excluded in zoning bylaw. Defendant Linfield zoning bylaw 411, no land, building, structure or part thereof shall be used for any purpose or in any manner other than for one or more of the uses specifically permitted, SJC. Because the plaintiff's use of his property for short-term rental was not specifically permitted under the bylaw, we conclude that it was not specifically permitted use. That's not based on the change in the bylaw. They really didn't
No.
change their bylaw.
The original decision was based on the fact that the building inspector ordered them to stop doing what he was doing under the previous bylaw.
Yeah.
Then they changed, then they added the bylaw to kind of cover any gray area that might have been in there.
They changed some language around, but the initial point was primary use, it wasn't allowed. And I mean, it
That
basically,
that decision of the building inspector to tell him to stop doing that was upheld by the
yeah, shooting incident on May 2 of
court. Yeah,
2016.
I'm not,
Yeah,
I'd be interested to hear Dan's. My perspective was the building inspector said, stop. The town passed a bylaw.
no,
That individual.
well, it happened, but not as quickly as
no.
you're thinking.
Dan, did you have any comment on
Yeah,
that?
I do. Wayne, as usual, was right. It was the building inspector who really led the march on this. But the reasoning changed. The building inspector, I forget at the moment what his original decision was in terms of why he shut it down. But that once it got up the ladder, a argument sort of arose that said, well, the building inspector says one thing, but he's right, but for a different reason. That is, they brought this whole sort of family element into a single dwelling sort of district. And they talked about the nature and the character of a neighborhood with families and whatnot. And that's really, at the end of the day, what the HSJC really focused on. That's not what the original sort of reasoning from the building inspector was.
I think most of the focus was on accessory use.
Well,
Yeah, I mean, we can go back and forth as to what happened in Linfield a dozen times.
Yeah.
Doesn't really gonna change our
Which
mission, right?
is why I brought the two other courts into it. They're all three courts are saying the same
I'm
thing.
not, I think I'm in total agreement with what.
That's
you are saying.
the bottom line. All three courts are saying the same thing, regardless of how they got it.
Because we haven't issued any cease and desist orders in town. It's kind of a moot point right now.
I agree.
Right?
So,
So I think what we really want to do at this point is we have to decide what, if any, bylaw changes that we're gonna recommend. I know that the planning board is kind of cutting us off at the knees but
we're doing what we gotta do.
any bylaw has to go, any bylaw changes would go through the planning board regardless.
Right.
Well,
But
okay, well.
As a committee, we have to sit down and decide what bylaw changes that we think are appropriate to handle the use of these structures, so that we can sit down and say, my personal opinion is I think we should change it to some kind of let it be, have it be allowed by some with a special permit use. I don't think it's some blanket. Adding short-term rentals to the allowable uses is a wise decision.
I don't either.
I think it has to have some kind of special, whether it be a special permit or some other process that establishes what will be a short-term rental and what can't be the short-term.
Mr.
I
Chair, let
think
me
it's a
just
lot harder.
clarify- Let me
I
clarify
think
one
it's a lot
thing.
harder to decide where you're going if you don't know where you are.
I understand that.
And that's what I'm trying to do here is clarify that particular issue. Go ahead, Dan.
Again, the planning board's role, it's only a zoning bylaw where they are required to have a hearing. And the hearing is not for them to approve or disapprove or make changes. It's just for them to say, okay, we're going to go to town meeting and give our input. So it's not as if it's got to get the planning board's approval. I just want to make sure everyone realizes that. They just have a duty under the statute to hold a hearing, and then they have an opportunity to comment on it. They don't have any right to change anything. They don't have any right to allow or disallow. So just keep that in mind.
Well, thank you.
So again, I think if for no other reason than to bring all of this that we've been doing for 6 months or so, whatever it's been, to some kind of a conclusion, is we have to decide what bylaw changes we think should be made. And get it down on a sheet of paper. We can agree to disagree on what ends up is the final end of that, but we'll be voting on that, right?
Sure.
So I think that's where we need to go. I think we need to just say, look at this, this is what we think needs to happen in order for the short-term rentals to be legal. Or, I mean, again, I think, at some point it's gonna come out of our hands anyway, but I mean.
Right.
We need to present something that's gonna say, this is what we think should have to happen between now and town meeting.
Two more points.
And then we've pretty much got our list of regulations, that regulation stuff that we've already pretty much finalized. That should become, if and when you get permission to be an Airbnb, these are the rules.
Sure.
These are the rules that we are establishing for that, but who can and can't be an Airbnb needs to be our primary concern, I think, at this point. But we can bring this whole conversation, we can talk around in circles for another 6 months, and we're not gonna, we do that, we're not gonna get anything done other than frustrate us.
I agree 100%. Like I said, my concern is to know where we are.
I'm with you on that, but I think we need to, let's try to push, get something actually accomplished that we can all say, this is what we did.
I agree with that.
Sound good?
I agree with that. I agree with it. Like I said, I got 2 more points here.
Go ahead, absolutely.
Okay, the question has come up a number of times as far as whether or not Airbnb and VRBO, short-term rental, is a business. According to an article posted in Airbnb Taxes and Tax Tips in January of 2020. The understanding from that point is running Airbnb is just like running any other business, in that taxes are due on the income you generate. Typically, since Airbnb requires active management, it is considered an active trade or business. This classification renders hosts as self-employed businesses. There's a big discussion, I know, as far as when it comes to investing in real estate, as to whether or not it's active or passive income. Passive income would be associated with a typical apartment rental. You basically find your renter, get them in there, they move in their furniture, and they call you once in a while to fix something, and you collect their rent, and that's about it. Not a heck of a lot more than just like investing in any other business. As active income, there's a lot more involved. And obviously Airbnb seems to agree that there is a lot more involved. But more importantly, the IRS does too. I have a memo here from the Office of Chief Counsel, Internal Revenue Service, dated 12/23/21. And there's no question. They believe it's active income. So if that's the test as far as what represents a business or not, and I think it probably is a pretty good one, I think we ought to keep in mind that maybe these are businesses that are doing business in a residential neighborhood. And I don't know how that would affect us, but it's good to have in mind, in my opinion.
I can help you with that. It really, at this, again, that would be a question that would be asked of someone who's currently running one and currently being challenged. What your ability is under your charter, under your mandate, is to determine where these can be, whether you call them businesses, hobbies, residential, it doesn't matter. You can still say these only can be in one district and not another, despite whatever you call it. So I wouldn't get caught up in that definition too much, because at the end of the day, you have the ability to draft bylaws, I'm sorry, create draft bylaws that say you can only be in these districts, no matter what you call it.
Okay.
And one thing I'll say on that, from my knowledge, either one is a rental income. You're paying taxes differently, much like if you own a clothing store versus you owned a hardware store. One is taxed, one isn't. They're both businesses. Either short-term rental or long-term rentals are both taxable incomes. If you own a long-term rental, there's more maintenance, there's cleaning, there's day-to-day activities, there's actually furnishing the units. For a short-term rental, they're definitely arguably not different from, they're very different from one another, but they both generate rental income. It's both claimed the same. The only difference is that portion you're paying to the state, and if you reside in the town, that portion you're paying to the town. And other states, obviously, I don't know if every state has imposed that short-term rental tax. Massachusetts has, and that's the only reason for differentiating whether you have a short-term or a long-term rental. Aside from that, maintaining them, operating, they're both businesses. They're both more or less the same thing. You don't have a cash register there. You're not omitting taxes. You're not required to omit taxes any differently at the end of the year, aside from that is paid directly through the website.
My point is that we have, the question is whether or not we have a business operating in a residential district. That's an important question, because our current bylaws have very strict restraints on businesses operating in a residential neighborhood. So that's why I bring it up, is that I think the question is substantial. It's no longer able to you can't look at it and say, oh, it's a real estate investment, that's passive income. It's not a business, it's an investment. It's not an investment according to the IRS, it's a business. And if that business is now in a residential neighborhood. So the last piece. This is a periodical, I guess you'd call it. It's called the All Hands Herald. It comes out of the Massachusetts Department of Fire Services. This is the June 2020 edition. And this talks about the current building code. And in this publication, they write, and this is, according to the 2015 International Building Code, which is the basis of the Massachusetts State Building Code, transient lodging is considered a hotel. They don't break it down by the number of bedrooms. They don't break it down by the size of the building. They don't break it down by the licenses they held as far as doing business as a hotel. If it's a transient business, it's a hotel. Even if no work is done to a single family house when it becomes a rental, that short-term rental, the 2015 International Residential Code no longer applies to it. The change of use to a house hotel, regardless of the extent of work, requires compliance with the IBC. I called and spoke with Dave Bowden, administrative compliance officer at Mass State Fire Marshal's office, who was familiar with this article. I said, has anything changed? He said, no. So I think that has a bearing on what we're talking about here. I think it has a very large bearing on what we're talking about here. But you like the but better. The good news is that the 2015 International Building Code has a carve out wherein it says on page Roman numeral 9, the IRC can also be used for the construction of live work units and small bed and breakfast style hotels where there are 5 or fewer guest rooms and the hotel is owner occupied. So we've already talked about owner occupied. We haven't limited the bedrooms. But according to this, in order to fall within the code,
That, yeah.
we need to. Now, obviously, anything, a multifamily, a mixed use type of building, that's a hotel. And as a hotel, the bar is raised substantially as far as exterior finish, interior finish, sprinkler systems, smoke detection, building alarm systems, etc. So that's something to keep in mind as far as that type of occupancy. And also the other possible alternative is that if we do allow a hotel without an owner occupants while it's rented, then there is a suggestion that speaking with an architect, getting a design put together, there are ways of customizing that residential 1 and 2 family dwelling to still meet the code, but that's an expense. So there is, yeah, the interesting thing there is that that was also presented at the Franklin Regional Council of Governments, which is the Franklin County section, where all of their cities and towns have been given a seminar on this back in June of 2021. And I know that North Adams is currently struggling with all the new regulations that they've been hit with. One other thing that was mentioned in that Franklin County seminar is that because we're now doing business with hotels, John, 105 CMR 435 kicks in as far as pools and hot tubs. And now you need a pool operator's license.
Rob, Airbnb is not a hotel. That's black and white. There's no question that it's not a hotel. So if you're trying to compare the two, you're really talking about apples and oranges. There might be some overlap in some building regulations, but they're not the same thing. The state definition requires a hotel to serve meals, for one. And that's short-term rentals don't do that.
Hotels and motels, but the bottom line is, Dan, that when we, it doesn't, the regulation says that regardless if you do any business or not, you have to upgrade the safety of that property if it's going to be used. It's a use change. It's no longer residential. The state says it's a use change. And you know, you can't take a 2-family house and put a bomb factory in it and say that there doesn't have to be any upgrade as far as the sprinkler systems and things like that. You can't just change the use of a building and not upgrade it to meet the safety standards.
Dan, if I could, two important things, definitions. One of them I think we adopted at our last meeting. First one is mass.gov. A short-term rental is an occupied property that is not a hotel, motel, lodging house, or bed and breakfast establishment where at least one room or unit is rented out by an operator through the use of advanced reservations. A short-term rental includes an apartment, house, cottage, and condominium. Second one, I think, spells out the commercial aspect. Boston.gov's definition. A short-term rental, these are both definitions for a short-term rental. A short-term rental is the use of a residential unit for a residential occupancy for a period of fewer than 28 consecutive calendar days for a fee. So one of them says that it's not a hotel, and one of them says that the use is for residential occupancy. I think we picked the second one.
Well,
being the
okay, let's
28 consecutive days.
realize Boston has its, when you say Boston.com, you mean the Boston City ordinances, I imagine.
This is Boston.gov's website, that
So-
definition picking up.
Well,
taking-
you gotta source these things, right? So you're saying this is a Boston city ordinance you're reading? Or at least emanates from?
Yes.
That would be their definition.
This is, yes, this is there at the
Well, okay.
first.
The zoning laws don't apply to Boston, okay? Boston has its own set of zoning ordinance, the zoning package. It's just one of those freaky things about New England. So I wouldn't rely too much on what Boston passed. They have their own, they go by their own rules in a lot of capacities, including zoning.
The first
that-
one, Dan, was mass.gov.
Okay, so if you're sourcing that's probably coming from the MGL. Yeah, I do believe that's pretty much the definition. And you'll notice it doesn't include a date, or sorry, number of days.
Correct.
But so that's where you guys have a lot of discretion in coming up with a draft bylaw that says we're going to limit it to 28 days. And I think it's 28 because it avoids this whole at-will tenancy at-will issue, because 28 days is the shortest month of the year, of course. So they avoid the
Correct.
idea of this being applied to that. So yeah,
Yep.
that's well within your grasp. And as you mentioned, it does specifically say it's not a hotel, motel.
So if our existing bylaw, I mean, this is obviously well outside of what the building code now requires that we do. And we are talking about the state building code here. But even if we weren't, as far as the building code saying, and as I said, the city of North Adams is currently wrestling with this. There is at least one seminar offered in one county that says it agrees with everything that I just read, that was issued by the Department of Fire Services.
Okay, but the
So-
building code and zoning are not the same thing. They're drastically different.
Well, if
Right,
if Wayne's gonna go out and inspect it and there's no sprinkler system in it, then he's gonna reject it.
That's not a zoning issue. That's a building code issue.
Right,
Remember,
but
Wayne
they go hand in hand though, remember, now you can't,
I don't know, is there a single town or city that has required that?
Doesn't
No.
matter.
the town
it's
is
not up to the city or town, that's
It
the
isn't.
point.
it's a
That's
state
the
law.
point that I'm trying to make it.
The state
The
says.
state building code and the state fire code. If the state building code says you have to build stairs with a 6-inch rise, I can't say to someone, oh, I do whatever you want.
Right.
That's what the state building code says. It doesn't, and to me, and it wouldn't make any difference if it's a single family or a 2-family or a 3-family. If the state building code says something, it applies to everybody. I understand that where Rob's coming from. If we say to someone, yeah, sure, go ahead, you can have an Airbnb, you can do this. If just because this town of Nahant gave someone permission to do something, doesn't mean they don't have to comply with the code that goes with that.
No, I
This is a
understand that. but-
code that applies directly to a short-term rental unit, and
Right,
they have to be in compliance with that code.
no,
I don't think it really. I don't think this room is the place to be concerned about it, because if it's gonna be the concern of the operator to be in compliance.
Well, but it is to a degree, because if we say that you don't have to have owner occupied, and the state code says that we do, then you're gonna be in conflict.
They're apples and oranges. Zoning bylaws.
I'm sure,
and building code
I
are
mean,
not- they
I'd
don't-
like to do some more research on it myself.
And
But-
the other thing you want to keep in mind is that, as our bylaw says in section 2, terms and words not defined herein, but defined in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts State Building Code shall have meanings given therein.
in mass.gov, there's no reference to a commercial code, there's no reference to sprinklers, and I'm not reading what's on the page there, but, and I'm not saying let's follow in line with a bunch of people doing things wrong and just assume it's right.
Chapter 780 says that the International Building Code is automatically part of our building code. The International Building Code is saying this is what it has to be, and we have people offering seminars around the state saying this is what it has to be.
I'm not disputing what you read off there, but without reading that whole thing, I can point out I don't think you'll find one city or town in the state of Massachusetts.
That doesn't matter to me. What matters to me
But
is
it
that when
matters to
Wayne
me
goes,
because it's probably wrong.
when, no, it's not wrong.
So every
So
city
you're
in
saying
town
the
is-
Department of Fire Services is wrong?
No, I don't think every city in town, for every Airbnb in every city in town should have sprinklers in it, and they're all just looking the other way. I think this is,
Well, I think because there's a lot of confusion.
I think
here.
it's a lot of confusion.
Definitely a lot of confusion. I know I'm confused.
Which one?
the commercial code,
The commercial?
referencing that short-term rental should go by a commercial code.
Ninth edition.
I mean, if that's the case, it's even easier. They would need ADA compliance. You have to put a hotel if you had a second floor in your house.
Yep.
I mean, an elevator.
Yep.
Which. You couldn't have stairs at your front entry, you'd need a ramp.
That's not a zoning issue, though. It has nothing to do with what you guys are doing.
It references transient lodging, and there's your definition of transient lodging.
So this references boarding houses, congregate living facilities, hotels and motels.
As examples, yeah. Anything that falls into the category of transient occupancy.
But these are all specific uses, boarding houses, congregate living facilities, hotels and motels.
Transient. Transient's the key word. That's the use.
Transient, I think is a pretty subjective word. If
Not
you
at
have
all.
a tenant,
That's the definition right there.
No, it's not subjective.
I mean, I'd love to read more into this, but that would be the first that I've ever heard of this,
I didn't-
that a short-term rental would be a commercial use.
The Department of Fire Services, they'll tell you the same thing.
But that's not zoning, though. It doesn't have to match. That's what they
But,
decide under the fire code. It's
Shouldn't
not
our zoning
zoning.
be in sync with what the law is?
They're two separate laws. They're apples and oranges. You're mixing up things that don't belong to be mixed. That's why Wayne wears two hats. One is a zoning enforcement officer, one is a building code officer. They're not the same thing. And yeah, there might be some overlap, sure there will be, but there are also some places where they don't exactly match because their objectives are different.
Right, but again, I can understand Rob's issue here is there, if the state is gonna classify any transient lodging as commercial use, then it changes the code that structure it has to comply with.
Right, in terms of building, but we have home rule power that gives us the ability to control our zoning within a certain degree. And it doesn't have to match exactly what the fire code is, or the building code for that matter. Of
No,
course,
we
the
can
building
have
code,
that.
in terms
Yeah,
of
that's-
matching.
Well, I obviously this is something we need to work on, but
But then I really don't think so. Again, you guys, you think you're
Well,
going
again,
on a
it's-
tangent.
if, look, I will certainly, as the building inspector, don't want to be put in the position where as a town, we decide that, you know, certain properties can be short-term rentals, only to find out that in order to actually to comply with code, they need to add a sprinkler system to the building.
Right, but that's a building code issue, not a zoning.
I understand that, but I want to understand as the guy who's gonna be doing that, is that what code am I gonna? What requirement is gonna be the actual requirement?
It would seem like
Because I would
it would
think-
be easier if what we're doing was in sync with what you need to do.
I won't disagree with that, and that's why, well, as far as that particular correlation between the code and zoning, I definitely want to do some more research on that myself. I think, but for tonight's meeting, I think let's stick with the zoning thing first. Let's. So far, we haven't done anything tonight.
I'm done.
No, Rob, good points.
No,
That's,
I mean,
that's
I
our
think
thinking, and that's.
And that's one of the issues that I had in my, my personal thinking. With all the short-term rental stuff was, well, when is it not a house anymore? When does it become a business?
And I said right from the beginning that how can you take a residential property and put transient people in there and not have it meet similar codes to what you'd expect in a hotel or a motel?
Well, I think you were present at the planning board hearings 5 or 6 or whatever number of years ago it was that I brought that exact thing up.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
When they wanted to decide whether or not we would allow bed and breakfast, facilities. I said, well, if you're gonna let someone be a bed and breakfast, they need to do some upgrades.
Yeah.
You can't just waltz around in a strange house in the middle of the night. If you have an issue, you need to be able to get out of that building. You're not gonna be comfortable. You don't know where the stairs are if you've never been there before.
Yeah.
And that any structure that's occupied by people who don't know the building should have safety. It should be again, and I'm with you on that, but let's try to keep it let's try to stay on the zoning stuff.
I understand. I understand.
I have no problem handing someone a list of requirements when they tell me they want to be an Airbnb and I say, here you go, this is what you have to do to your house. I don't have
Well,
any problem with that.
But you want to make sure.
I want to make sure I want to make sure it's accurate.
And
Yeah.
consistent and defensive.
Absolutely.
Defensible being a very key word.
Okay, so let's toss around some ideas as to what we should or shouldn't do to our zoning bylaws right now. That would either allow, ban, regulate, or otherwise handle short-term rentals.
On the planning board, I've focused on, and we've said this before, you don't want to just say what problems have we had in the past, you don't want to live in the past, but we've gone 12 years unrestricted. Zero anything.
Gotcha.
Several years without even a state registry. Rob's list I read quickly with the Airbnbs. I think what you're seeing there, Rob, are some old listings. One of them is a house that I'm moving into that formerly operated as an Airbnb. So,
Which is that on Summer Street?
yes,
Yeah, it's not on the list because there's no Summer Street on the list.
maybe they removed theirs then.
It's never been there. It wasn't there back in April either.
Okay,
No, there's nothing on it, Summer Street.
the only list I pulled up, I don't know if it was through the state, listed every license ever given. I don't know if you're supposed to go back and say, I'm not using my list, my short-term rental anymore. I've tried to watch it over the summer. It was at 24, arguably early in the summer, and then I did see an uptick to 26. That's a non-scientific fashion of going on Verbo or Airbnb, or the home share, whatever the other house is. You can go on there, you can select dates, and it will give you the map of Nahant with all the units available, and you click on them. You could see any information on those units, so on and so forth. I'm not digressing, but back to the registration process. If we did a tutorial right now and said, let's list an Airbnb, there's no way around going on there and not linking it up, not setting up a listing on Airbnb or VRBO without that state registration card. Could you completely falsify one? Probably. But what that ID gives you is almost an EIN number. And then VRBO or Airbnb will take that number and say, unit 7743596 had an occupancy this weekend, here's your portion of the tax. I don't know how long it would take for Massachusetts to say, we don't have that, that's made up. But they take that, they force you to give them that registration card. That registration card, I've seen their samples of them online, says clearly this has to be posted somewhere within the dwelling unit where it can be read and accessed. And this has to be submitted to Airbnb and VRBO. Historically, maybe like Rob said, prior to Massachusetts passing that law, if you were Verbo prior to that and you never registered, that's the potential loophole I see. That's some bad bookkeeping by VRBO or Airbnb. And that's, absolutely something I think we could crunch on with bylaws going forward by saying, give us that registration ID give us last year's taxes, show us this is an active listing through the state and it's registered. Back to what I started saying, I've tried to see if it upticks in the summer, because there's been a number of folks that say, we rent it in the summer. You know, we rent out a portion of our house to offset our bills, and then in the wintertime, as we can imagine, it dies down. I've tried to see if the uptick goes up. It did go up a couple of units. I noticed a few new ones pop up and kind of plateau out. And again, back to what I started saying, we don't want to live in the past and say, okay, any problems we've had will be the only problems that we're ever going to have, so let's just fix them and we're good going forward. But to all the folks out there listening now, to the folks that have come to the planning board, sent correspondence via email, we know what the problems are. You're not supposed to have a party per Airbnb. If you do, you could be thrown off as a host, you could be thrown out as a guest. If nobody complains to them, it goes unnoticed. So parties, nuisances, over occupying these spaces, as we set forth right out of the gate, health and safety, you know, are these habitable spaces? Do they meet code? Do they have, if you're calling that a bedroom, does it have an egress window? Parking. We're probably all gonna feel differently on this, but there should be no on-street parking. We could say it's per bedroom, it's per this, it's per that. I can tell you, a lot of people rent a car and they come here, 5 people in a car, so to base it off a bedroom, we might be setting a rule forward on something, restricting something that maybe we don't need to do. Maybe the bedroom doesn't directly correlate to a car, as we might assume, because they are people coming in for a weekend and leaving, so they could carpool. But I think boilerplate, black and white regulations like on-street parking. Overall, if you have a 14-bedroom house, we probably shouldn't allow 28 people. You know, I see a lot of towns that have been successful with passing bylaws, restrict the overall number of guests. A big thing is going to be the registration. Simple complaints. If there's a complaint made and there's people parking all over the street and there's a photograph sent into the whoever's going to be governing this, that person can and probably will lose their right to operate. I think if we make a set of bylaws that are going to attack every part of any complaint that somebody could have about these, then we could bulletproof them. I think Rob has done a tremendous job, but for every new court case, there's an old one, and every this, there's a that. You know, we referenced New Orleans early on. I know at the end of August, that entire thing got turned over. Their Airbnb bylaws that they passed, restricting them, or I think they eliminated them. August 23rd, I just looked up the article, got squashed and got turned upside down. So I think to have something that everybody should play by, can play by, will eliminate the problems for the town. I think that's where we go. And like I said, I think capacity, I think parking, outside noise complaints. I don't know if we could say no outside noise after 9 o'clock, when for the neighbors is at 11. You know, it's funny to start saying that house can make noise till 11, but that one can only make noise outside till 9. But if that's going to fix it, that's what we try. We try this. If people put themselves out of business for not acting accordingly, then they do. If people unanimously all act accordingly, then, you know, I feel like this, maybe it won't be this exact committee, but I feel like this process should be ongoing. For if anything, I've learned in the 6 months we've done this, this is a new thing. Nobody knows really how to govern it. Nobody knows what to call it. We're arguing tonight if it's commercial or residential. You know, it's a new thing, and it's a new venture, just like when someone said, I want to put businesses in downtown Nahant. I'm sure the town at that point said, wow, that's going to cause a nightmare. But if you figure out how to do it and set parameters for it, and as we've done every year, upheld those and maybe make them stronger or loosen the reins a little bit if we see the need, it's worked. You know, it's worked good. Because again, there could be a huge bad side to this. And the worst side is people in this town feeling like the house they live in has changed, the neighborhood they live in has changed. We don't want to do that. You know, we want to keep the place as a quiet house, and regardless who's sleeping there, whether it be the owner or a short-term renter, But on the flip side of the coin, in my opinion, there's a good side to it. We had a heartfelt email sent to us from that gentleman staying at a wedding. I don't know if he's gonna come here and throw the party of a lifetime that's gonna shut Airbnb down forever, but if he comes here and he goes to a wedding at a facility that this town has and has allowed, and it allows weddings, it's a service that the town is offering. It's a service just like the tides. You know, I'd be willing to bet the tides probably wouldn't stay open another 6 months if it depended on solely Nahant patrons keeping their doors open. So I hope we can take the viewpoint that this could be good for the town. It gives some flexibility to the residents. Let friends in, let families in. There's a funeral, there's a family gathering. I just recently met someone that was here staying at an Airbnb. They wanted to buy a house. And I said, wow, that's an interesting thing. And they said, try it before you buy it, I guess, right? You know, let's come here and see what it's all about. And some people might find that evasive, some people might find that offensive, but if they're coming here and they're playing by the rules, they should be causing no harm. They shouldn't be putting cars on our street. Police calls, fire, EMS, any of that, so.
Okay, thank you, Steve. All right, anyone want to toss up any bylaw changes, additions, deletions?
Supposed to change bylaws, aren't
Well, I still think we need to change the bylaw.
I think there's going to be several bylaw changes depending on which direction we go with. Okay. So. As far as what we have right now. I don't know if you have the worksheet. I didn't bring copies.
Oh, yeah, I have. Go ahead.
Just. A quick look through here as far as what we currently have. The definition that we're using for short-term rentals. I think should be changed. We're following as far as what Cambridge had. And I've seen comments lately that basically we should just insert what's in the state law, whatever that says. I can't.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that.
That sound reasonable? Just go with that.
The mass.gov one,
I don't know if it's,
this would be it right here.
Or whatever.
Short-term rentals, an occupied property that is not a
Yeah.
hotel, motel, blah, blah. I think the first one we took was Boston's. That referenced the 28 days.
yeah. But
If you guys,
wherever we can quote.
if you want, I'll read that out loud.
No,
Again?
it's all right. Certainly, if we give it a definition that's anything different than the state definition, all it's gonna do is cause confusion, so
Okay, so I'm
it
gonna
makes
go
no sense to even think like that.
state. Short-term rental. State. Definition. All right, short-term is fine, short-term. Adjacent.
While Rob's blasting through there, one other interesting thing I found, a few cities and towns did it. To be a short-term rental. I don't know if we'd want to set a guideline so someone doesn't send us the Webster's dictionary. Couple-page operating pamphlet. How does your short-term rental operate?
This
Is
is
there-
not a bylaw discussion, right? The bylaw discussion we were just having. That's
I'm
not,
No, I'm thinking that could be part of the bylaw. Part of your approval process would be,
no. No. See, like most 90% of this sheet that we've been working on this is rules and regulations. This is not bylaw stuff.
I think whatever we do, we have to call a bylaw though.
No. No.
Yeah, yours-
Bylaws
we-
regulate the use of the structure. Right, so if. So my suggestion would be that in order for short-term rentals to be a legal use, then it has to be added to the list of legal uses in the town of Nahant. We have a list.
Yep,
The only way it can be a legal use is if you add it to that list.
okay,
So that would be the first bylaw change that needs to be made, that short-term rental has to be added to the list of legal uses. Now, I think it should be listed as an accessory use as opposed to a primary use. Right, so that was the conversation that we've been having since the very beginning, is short-term rental an accessory use? To an existing single or two-family dwelling? Because if it's a primary use, then it could be anything. I don't think it's, so we have to make that call. What bylaw change, or how do we want to describe short-term rental as this use? Is it going to be allowable as a matter of right, or is it going to be allowable under a special permit?
Could a single family have two uses? Could it have a
Absolutely.
primary use and an accessory use?
Right now, an example of an accessory, an allowable or permissible use of a single family house is a doctor's office.
But that would be a separate part of the house, right?
Well,
Like, could
It will.
habitants then go sleep in that doctor's office? That own the house?
It only.
no, but I'm just saying that's,
The amount of space, the percentage or something, I can't remember.
there's a percentage allowable. But the point is that it's an allowable use. You don't have to go to the ZBA and beg, you don't have to beg your neighbors. If a doctor wants to set up an office in a house, a legitimate single family home in town of Nahant, he has the right to do that.
I think.
Office of a-
I think he has a.
Doctor, dentist, architect, there's a list.
Mhm.
It's in the zoning bylaw. Right, so that's considered an accessory use allowed as a matter of right. Now we have a second list. That's allowed under by special permit. See, so that's what I'm saying. So
I'm familiar with that.
there's a list, right? So if we list short-term rental as one of those accessory uses, then we have to determine whether it should be an accessory use as a matter of right, or is it gonna be an accessory use by special permit? That's the bylaw changes that need to be made. They have to at least list the concept of a short-term rental. What rules end up surviving the process as to how many people and stuff, that's not the bylaw. You have to have a bylaw first, then you can establish rules and regulations afterwards. So that's what we have to determine, is what's going to be our recommendation, that what bylaws need to change and how. It's going to come down to paragraph, X, in this wording, remove this wording, add this wording. That's how you change the bylaw. And that's what we need. I think that's what we, because discussing rules and regulations at this point isn't going to help us. We need to settle on what is going to be our recommendation as this committee as to what bylaw changes need to be made. Then
Specifically, pretty much the accessory use or not.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the only,
Well, yeah,
that's my own opinion. I mean, that's
and I
been working with the zoning bylaws for well over 30 years now.
agree with it 100%. I obviously, we've had this conversation about once you've had a chance to research
But that's another whole thing.
this change, you can
Because-
see adjustments being made as far as the number of bedrooms and things.
And well, again, a bylaw change that at this point, if we're gonna, the bylaw change wouldn't, well, it could, I won't say it shouldn't, it could have a limit on bedrooms. It doesn't have to,
But if,
we don't have to, as a matter of bylaw change, doesn't have to regulate the bedrooms within the bylaw change, it just has to regulate the use.
but if the code says that it's up to 5 bedrooms in an owner occupied in order to,
In order to stay away from the commercial code.
yes,
Yeah.
then that seems like an adjustment we would want to make up front.
And you could also leave that up to the person who wants to make an 8-bedroom unit, and they'll say, well, yeah, you can do that, you just have to comply with a different code,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Just like when someone comes to me with a building permit application, are you building a gas station or are you building a shed? You got a code for this, we have a different code for that.
Exactly.
We're still, in the bylaw doesn't change. Right, it's what are you building? this building has to comply with this code, this building complies with a different.
It has to do with the use.
So, you know, again, it's, if someone wants to do something, you know, over and above what the residential code allows, then you'll have to comply with a separate code.
And I-
But do we need to stop them from doing that within the bylaw change, like up to 5 bedrooms? Do we need to regulate that within the bylaw?
I don't think
Or do
so.
we allow the individual property owner to decide which code they want to be in compliance with?
Okay, so you're getting there, yeah.
See where I'm coming from?
Yeah, the bottom line is though, that if they want more, like, yeah, I think that was a great example. If you want more than 5 bedrooms, then we're gonna have to take a look over at the building code and not the residential code.
Correct.
Because now,
Absolutely.
now you're stepping outside that opportunity.
Absolutely.
Yes, exactly, and that's exactly what it says. Perfect.
Right? So I mean, again, I don't have any issues with the fact that maybe we're not complying with the right codes. I mean, maybe we're not even thinking about codes, right? I mean, a lot of people are not thinking. Most people don't think about building codes. Even when someone says to me, I want to put in an apartment, well, you have fire separation issues, you have this, you have egress issues. You don't just, throw a kitchen in the corner over here and call it a 2-family. That's, you have to comply with it, we have to comply with code.
And to your example, most people don't think about use change, especially in an area where 99.9% of everything you're doing is going to be residential.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, so that's the area that we still have a lot of research to do. When does the use change?
And
Right? When does the use change and when does a new code come into
And does the use-
fall in?
is,
But none of that happens until we change the zoning bylaw. Right?
at the same time, yeah, always bearing in mind that we're not looking to give people permission to step outside of the building code.
Oh, no.
From a safety
absolutely
standpoint,
not. That certainly would,
yeah, we
I
don't want to see that happen.
absolutely not.
Good.
No.
All right.
I think regardless of what we do, they couldn't anyways. We couldn't make a bylaw change. And have someone, like you said, put a kitchen in their basement, call it an accessory dwelling. Right?
Well, that brings up another whole issue, this new conversation about accessory dwelling units. But that's something that this committee has nothing to do with.
I'm not sure the building code is caught up with that one yet. They're still trying to catch up. with
The
short-term
planning
rentals.
board is working on that. We're trying to.
Yeah. And I know that there's a lot of cities and towns around the state that have developed an accessory dwelling unit provisions within their zoning bylaws. I don't know how they're handling it from a code perspective at this point. I haven't spoken to anybody that's an official in any of those cities or towns, but again, we have uses and then we have codes that go with those uses. So first we establish what's going to be allowed to be a use, then we worry about what code they have to comply with afterwards.
Good. So
We're not making a lot of headway here, so why don't we grab some public comment?
okay. Anybody got a hand up? I don't see any.
There's a note down there from Dan.
Just a couple of chats.
I don't even know.
Yeah. maybe you click on that. Oh, okay. It looks like there's a bunch of them.
Well, I would like to say something.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Name and address though first.
Perfect.
Yeah, Rebecca Flacker, 345 Nahant Road. This whole conversation at the beginning of the meeting is kind of interesting. I think the whole committee, well, we voted at the town meeting to come up with an STR committee to come up with bylaws, which I think is necessary and useful for safety reasons and complying to codes. I'm not disagreeing on that. But the whole discussion about if it's legal or hotel or business seems, as our town lawyer also pointed out, kind of off the path, because at the same, I think it was the same meeting, we also voted in a huge majority of residents that occupancy taxes, for example, should be implemented, which we did. So I'm paying occupancy taxes. I do own an Airbnb ever since, which is fine. But I don't see how that could, like, how can an STR be illegal if the town just implemented new taxes on it? That alone doesn't make sense to me. And I also, I thank Daniel Script for his input, and I would rather rely on his knowledge as a lawyer than on some other opinions that came up here. But again, I think working on rules and regulations is necessary, and I can see that. But I think, and I hope that the committee will focus on that and not trying to, at least from with all due respect from some side, to come up with reasons why not to have SDRs at all. That's not the point or the meaning of this committee. So, and I just want to point this out again. I was a little surprised about the whole discussion at the beginning of this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Got a hand up in the
Right, Alec.
corner.
By Paddock?
Bye.
Yep, opening up my video, yes.
There
There
you
you go.
So as I said at the last meeting,
We have your address by,
oh, I'm sorry, 172 Willow Road, by Paddock. As I brought up at the last meeting, we can talk about rules, regulations, bylaws, codes, but the overarching issue is community and neighborhoods. So if you take a street that's all Airbnbs, this is a business district. This is no longer a neighborhood. So you go for a walk and you don't know the names of anybody, and you see different license plates every single day on all those properties. And I think this is a really profound issue in this situation here. I mean, whether there are sprinklers or not, or whether it's a hotel, motel, short-term B&B, inn, whatever, I think this committee really needs to think about the larger issue. The overarching and holistic issue is, what does all this commercial activity and money-making do to the character of Nahant? And as I said before, a young couple wants to move here and buy a small place. Those places are being snapped up for Airbnbs. If a person would like to come here and have an apartment and live there for years, they're going to have a harder time getting them, I believe, because they've been snapped up for Airbnbs, because you can make a lot more money off of an Airbnb than a long-term rental apartment. So I'm urge you to think in the larger terms of community, the neighborhood. This is a very tiny town with a very special aura, and it's a delight to live here and walk around and talk to people all the time. But I go down Furbish Road, I don't know almost nobody, because they're all strangers with different license plates. And I think this is really sad. I really do. And I hope that you will think about this in the larger terms. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Brian.
anyone else?
We want to read that chat.
I can't get to
Want me to?
there it goes.
Yikes, yeah. I don't know if we should read that. There's quite a transcript there.
If you want.
Anybody can speak, I guess.
We can all see it.
Who we getting a message
Oh,
from
we
here?
can see that? Oh,
I don't know who DD is. Oh, the adult. Okay. So.
and what Vi said, I mean, it's. Sound of that does sound frightening. You wouldn't want to see this town. I've lived here for 30 years. I don't plan on going anywhere. I just had a baby here, and he'll be at the Johnson school where I was, so. You wouldn't want to see this town turn into Boylston Street, but. We've been gunning for 12 years now without anything. And it's, I don't know, it hasn't happened.
And looks like we don't have any other hands.
No, we get anyone else out there looking to ask a question or make a comment?
Wayne, do you see item one? How are we, the accessory use? Is that like the first hill to get over?
I think it's the only hill. It's really the hill.
Everything else kind of falls in.
Because everything else falls into that. If we were, if we have a bylaw change in front of the town meeting that clarifies what an STR is and how we expect to handle it, then it will be up to the voters to decide. Are we, one, if they vote not to add it to the use of permissible uses, then it won't be a permissible use.
You spoke of two parts. First, accessory use, yes or no? And if yes, by right or by special permit.
Correct. Because it absolutely, well, again, this is only my opinion, it absolutely should be an accessory use to an existing building. It can't be a primary use. I don't think it should be. And I don't think anyone will get much of an argument out of that.
So, Mr. Chair, is that really just more than, isn't that just an owner occupied situation? Isn't that really what that comes down to? Which is
I'm not
specifically
sure.
addressed.
You know,
It's not on
I
the
only-
boards and lodgers right now. It's basically saying that you rent out 2 rooms with the resident family.
right.
And this would be the same thing.
I mean, so if
Well, no, because you could. Not every accessory use definitely requires that the resident family be in the building.
No, but I pointed out to that one specifically as far as what we're talking
No,
about.
I understand that, but in other words, so theoretically, we could give someone permission to use the building as a short-term rental. With not necessarily requiring that the resident family be there 100% of the time.
They can live there like during the week and rent it out on the weekend.
Again, I'm not sure how what would be the, where that would converge, but
if we mimic, like, say, Linfield, they require in that, I think it was an R1 district. Single family houses, you need a special permit to operate. What about a legal 2-family?
But
That's,
if you get permission in Linfield to operate, are they requiring that the homeowner be present? We don't know that, right?
My understanding is Linfield only allows a building district.
no,
Yes.
Well, whatever, but it doesn't matter what district it is. The question would be, at
No.
this point, is are they requiring that there be a resident on the premises?
what I read from
One
that
of the
side
questions, because that's obviously an issue with some of the, right, Airbnbs in here in town, is there an owner occupant on the property?
yeah, that's, so I won't even reference that, because again, I
No,
think
but
we're
I'm just
making
saying
strides getting away from that. I can see the importance of that. I can see someone thinking the importance of that. I could point out the fact that probably the most problematic Airbnb we had was an owner occupant. I think
I'm
the
not
ones,
disagreeing with that, but the point is that we don't,
so if
we
it's,
can regulate this in a number of different ways. The question is, that's why the special permit use, by making it as a special permit use, it can be customized to a particular property.
I think the special permit is beneficial to the neighbors also.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
But who-
that's really who we need to be talking about here, the neighbors.
if any of if we made replacing your roof by a special permit only, how many roofs wouldn't get replaced
I
in this
don't get the correlation.
The neighbors should have say, absolutely, but first and foremost, the host should be upheld. We should give them a set of rules and regulations to be upheld by. If they can meet all those rules and regulations and cause no neighborhood disturbance. again, I might irritate people in saying this, but why would they not be allowed to? Like, you can replace your roof if you get a building permit, but you can't do it at midnight. You know, there's rules and regulations for,
Replacing your roof is a lot different from putting a hotel next door.
I think a hotel is an inflammatory sense. The definition we just said we
I
were
think
gonna
it
adopt
is.
says it's not a hotel.
Oh, you
The
know what?
definition,
I'm going with the state on that one. And quite
Well, the-
honestly, in our.
the state's definition
In
actually
our,
says it's
in
not a
our
hotel.
zoning bylaw, it says that we refer to the building code when defining hotel.
But Rob, the definition we just said we take, a short-term rental is an occupied property that is not a hotel.
I'm looking at what zoning code said. I don't know what we approved. I'm going with. zoning
I
code.
think the members of this committee should at least speak. Agreeing to the
Our
definition.
building code says if we're going to define hotel, we look at the building code because it's not defined inside the zoning bylaw. So now we're stepping outside the bylaw and defining it some other place.
No, but a short-term rental is not a hotel,
It could be.
Well, it says it is now.
which does.
What I just showed you a little while ago, transient occupancy, it's a hotel.
Mass.gov's website says it literally says it's not a hotel.
No, well, you're reading, you're not reading that the same way. It's, what they're saying is it's not an existing hotel.
It doesn't
Not
say
an actual
it says
hotel.
It's not a hotel.
But I don't think they mean to say that it could never be defined as a hotel. They're saying it's not.
I think they're very different. I think
Well-
calling it a hotel would, you know, is the same as whatever.
My
Calling it
memory
a
serves,
place to get
our
drunk.
bylaw already says that you can't have a hotel.
You can't have a
It's not
hotel.
allowed.
And basically, it's, and it doesn't define what that is, so it says, look at the building code to get a definition.
So, but
And
that's,
that's the building code.
The state law
For a
defines
hotel.
hotel. This is not a hotel. It gives a very specific definition of a hotel. This is not a hotel.
I just
Maybe
think
for
us,
building
I'm
code
just
purposes,
reading the building code, which is what we're told to
but
look for.
that's a regulation. That's not state law.
But
Okay?
our.
That's a part of the CMR.
So is our bylaw wrong for telling us to look at the building code?
It might be in contradiction of the definition of the state, and if it is, and that's a problem, yes. But then again, at the same time, who knows how long ago that was passed? I think the new zoning bylaws came into effect in 1990.
and Rob, I'm
So,
saying.
they're pretty old.
I think members of this committee calling it a hotel, when we have town council saying it's not. It sounds like
that's
there's
why
more
we're a
agenda
committee and not
than
just one.
making bylaws, as the previous speaker said we should.
We
should
what
do
we're
it.
trying to make is that we need to come up with legitimate bylaw changes that have some possibility of being passed at town meeting.
We do have a handout that was not out before.
Caroline.
Yeah, sure. Carolyn?
Yes, hi, Caroline Reinchen,
Hello.
11 Hillcrest. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Couple questions for the committee. One, there was a reference to Marblehead's regulations, which I think might have been misinterpreted, and I posted a link directly to their regs in the chat. I'm not sure if you can see it. I'm happy to email it directly to you all. The second thing is, I think Dan might have actually solved this, but there was reference from one of the committee members in regards to the state definition, including owner occupied, which I don't think is also accurate. So again, I would love to have some clarification on that from maybe town council.
So what's your question again?
I'm confused what the question is.
There was a reference from one of the committee members in stating that the state definition implies or requires that short-term rentals be owner occupied.
No, it doesn't. It just says
Okay.
that's one of the possibilities.
Right,
Because
right.
there's the owner occupied, short-term rental, there's a
It's a
non-owner.
residential code.
If it's
Yeah,
under.
but-
Exactly. So
But-
it's,
But,
okay, thank you for that clarification.
but just to make it more clear, if I can, this
Yep.
committee has the ability to draft a bylaw that says we will only,
Yep.
we only allow, well, develop a bylaw that says we'll only allow owner occupied. That's within the power
Gotcha.
of town meeting.
Yep. And then there was a resident, Ms. Vipatak, who made a comment in regards to a whole street being short-term rentals. So I'd like some clarity in regards to the validity of that statement.
It's
if
true.
possible. I'm sorry,
It's very
I
true.
think I saw in the chat, there was 2 out of 5.
2 out of 5.
Oops, is
It's
on
not-
deferred.
No,
Does that equate to the whole street? Or,
Yes.
sorry, so I just kind of want to make sure we're very factual in our
This-
statement.
Rob, what do you
Yes,
have?
I can confirm.
Street.
I can talk about Furbush Road.
As far as
Okay.
what's registered,
Yeah,
Furbush Road is 75% Airbnb.
75%. So that, how many homes out of the total homes on that
Three
street?
homes, 3 homes are Airbnbs, and 1 is a regular home.
that's true.
Can we validate
Yes.
that?
She said, that's accurate.
It's accurate. I'm not lying. It's true. You can go have a look at the license plates.
The Clark said there was 2 out of 4, but then I
No,
thought
there's only 4 houses on that street, and 3 of them are Airbnbs,
That's right.
2 of them are registered.
2 of which are registered.
I thought
As of last week.
the third, the Clark said that the neighbor had proposed they may.
Right.
Only 2.
So again, I
So
think I'm just
half-
encouraging,
Yeah, it's different.
encouraging the committee to make sure that, you know, we're working off of facts and not speculation. The next item that I would like to address is that in the last meeting back in July, I think it was July 26th was the last meeting. There was a draft bylaw that was presented to the committee. I would like to ask if you've all had a chance to read it and what your thoughts are, and if you have any questions in regards to, you know, really just a group of hosts and supporters that came together because we believe in regulation and what you thought of it, and if that could serve as a potential draft for you to work off of.
Okay, well, let me tell you that I've read it. And it's very Airbnb
centric.
Friendly.
friendly, yeah, that's the right word. I mean, it's
And
got
then-
some great points, it's got some great points in it, I'm not gonna dismiss it as not workable, but it's got a ways to go to be a usable paperwork, but yeah, it's headed in the right direction.
Basically, what we have here is the Newton guideline. and,
No, I would disagree with that, actually.
That too, but the one thing that that did stand out to me is that it basically takes out Newton's reliance on not having unoccupied short-term rentals, or not owner-occupied short-term rentals.
Your belief on that, do you think that will, just curious, not in a debate fashion, what does that accomplish? Because the one,
Good question.
I think we both know of a couple problematic Airbnbs, one which we know of better, were both owner occupied. But both of them were going by no rules. So. Do you think the situation, let's say that owner occupied Airbnb that was problematic, if the owner didn't live there, do you think the problems would have been that much worse? Or adversely?
We have no way of knowing whether the owner was actually there or not. Just because the
Owner
person
occupied by
listed
definition.
as their address doesn't mean they live in present. We don't have any idea whether or not that owner was actually ever present during any of these rentals that he was doing. We don't really know that. We have no way to know.
Correct, no, I agree with that, and I
It would have
would,
been
I wouldn't-
elsewhere. We don't know.
yeah, and I wouldn't even know unless you had video surveillance of every single Airbnb that night. That gentleman did call into the planning board was trying to seek assistance with giving him documentation to forward to guests to say there's no weddings allowed. Which kind of spun our heads, but he claimed he lived there. That was his primary residence. He claimed he occupied space.
But again, that doesn't necessarily mean he was there.
But wouldn't that be the case for any
Absolutely, I'm not, and I'm
So
not.
my question
disagreeing.
is just what is owner occupied fix? If we're even.
I'm not sure if it fixes anything.
Well,
Yes.
let's go back to my opening review here, where I added Swampscott, Marblehead, Lynn, and Revere to the list of communities next to us that don't allow.
Revere does. I don't, and again, I don't want to debate all night. Revere certainly does. Revere has a residency requirement. That's it.
Okay, well, you know what? We can double check that.
I'm sure
we
of
can-
it.
Oh, that's fine.
I
We
know
can
that
double
Mike-
check
Michael
that.
Wells
That's not what I read, but you know what? That's fine. The bottom line is that the target grows bigger as far as Nahant being an investment opportunity for people from anywhere, not only in town, but from any other community and across the country. We would be, other than Revere, possibly, the only community that's allowing people to buy a property and use it as nothing but an investment short-term rental. They never go in the place. Why do we want to be that kind of a target? Why do we want to be that? I don't understand.
I haven't looked at Swampscott. I just looked up as we were talking.
But my question is, why would we want to be that? Why would we want to be that community that wants to invite people to buy properties from all across the country and the world to do nothing but use them as short-term rentals? Why would we want to be that when everyone else says no?
I respect that. There's been multifamilies that have come up for sale here in the last year, 2 years, 3 years that have sat on the market for months, maybe a year. So it could very well be coming. It hasn't come yet. And yes, what you're saying, I think we all look at investors differently. I would look at investors like an investment firm, like BlackRock coming in and buying 200 houses in Nahant and taking over a section of it. I wouldn't think of an investor as someone that buys a property and lives in it, or buys a property and rents it out that lives
How is that
nearby.
not an investor?
Well, I guess it depends how you look at an investor. We're all investors, more or less. If you buy a single family house and you rent a portion of it, you don't become an investor at that point. That's just simply that's a different source of revenue. It's a different source of renting your property. It's not a sole objective to gain majority or somewhat of a majority of a town or a space and completely change the dynamics. You know, investors, back to Revere, came down Revere Beach. Those are investors to me. You know, there's 9 200-unit apartment complexes where once stood single families. That would be my fear to an investor coming in, not if Wayne hit a scratch ticket tonight and said, I'm gonna buy a house and rent it out. I mean, would that be an investor?
Yes. Absolutely.
Different scale. Different scale.
Small investor, big investor, it's still.
So I guess anybody that rents out a house would be an investor.
Yep,
Absolutely.
Okay.
different scale.
Another thing that I thought was interesting anyway is in a discussion of Airbnb's recent new screening tools to stop parties. The San Francisco-based company said the technology is designed to prevent a customer's request for reservation from ever reaching the host of the property involved. Airbnb said people blocked from renting an entire home might be able to book a single room because the host is more likely to be around. Why would that be important?
If you rent the place in Killington, out in 20 acres of land, it's probably more probable to have an all-out bash. If you go to Nashville, you're probably more likely to have a bachelorette party there. Nahant, you're probably most likely to have someone coming to be close to the water, go to a wedding.
But the point is that they said that the person who they blocked from renting a property because they thought it was a likely candidate to have a party there is they're not going to be able to rent a house, but the system would let them rent a room in a home with the host if there was a host there. That's the point. Is they're indicating that there's a difference between someone who might be an undesirable renter renting the whole house versus renting a home share where the host is still there. That to me sounds like
I see what you're saying.
they are saying that it's less risky. There's a responsible person on site.
That's an interpretation of it. Airbnb passed that no party rule. Again, I have yet to see Airbnb police driving around here. I don't think they're coming anytime soon. The only police are the host. If John rents from me and throws a party and I say, boom, here's a picture of John and his 20 guests at my house, he's removed from the platform. Could John go make, you can't make another name, could John's significant other make a profile and go rent another space and throw a party? Yes, absolutely, but you could do that in any aspect of life. You can crash your car tonight after you're drunk and go rent a car tomorrow and do it all over again. So there's gonna be flaws in any.
So it's getting late, so let's do this. I think let's schedule our next meeting and let's work on bylaw specific proposals between now and then and bring them to the next meeting.
Works.
Let's do that. Because I really like to get this
Done.
wrapped up at some point. I don't want to be sitting here on Christmas Eve.
I'm hoping to.
So we'd be looking at the 27th.
Correct.
Okay,
That was easy.
Now, Wayne, should. I'll jot my ideas down prior to the meeting, but. Should we be focusing on things like occupancy, parking?
you can focus on whatever you think should be an appropriate bylaw change.
Those are all bylaw changes.
Now, if you make it a part of the bylaw, it can be a bylaw change.
I thought like in the table of uses, right now, there's a restaurant and it says you have to have X amount of parking and.
But
blah, blah,
that's
blah.
not listed in the table of uses, that's elsewhere.
So, okay, I
That's-
pictured this was
That's
like,
in the parking section of the zoning bylaw and the signage section of the zoning bylaw.
I pictured we were creating was like short-term rental, the definition. What you have to do to be a short-term rental, licensing, registration.
I don't
You're-
think that's where we're at. I don't think that's all part of the bylaw, but I don't. That's something that Dan can help us out with as far as what is actually included in a bylaw to change versus what becomes just a regulation after the fact.
Yeah, parking would be a bylaw issue, and you can regulate the existence, and I think that would fall under the regulate the existence portion of the allowance that you have.
But it wouldn't be in the same, all within the same piece of bylaw, would it?
No, it would be, you'd say
What I'm
like
saying, it would be
in the parking section. like you
the
said.
use section of the bylaws, then there's the parking section of the bylaws, and the signage section of the bylaw.
Yep.
Right, so we have different sections of the zoning bylaw.
Oh,
that-
absolutely, yeah, what I would.
All of which may or may not be added to or altered somewhere along the line.
Absolutely.
So are we hoping to make? And I ask everybody here this, are we hoping to make a set of draft bylaws, let's
Yeah,
call them, that
That's
says
exactly what we want.
A to Z?
Yeah.
This is what a short-term rental is, this is how one can
Yes.
live, this is the rules and regulations that must live by,
Exactly.
this is the penalties if you don't.
Right, so earlier, you were trying to make the distinction, and I thought you made it clearly. Bylaw changes come before rules and regulations.
Absolutely.
So,
Because a bylaw might say something to the effect of shall comply with the rules and regulations with some name to it. Now, on a separate piece of paper is the rules and regulations.
so
Exactly.
I'm trying to streamline our effort here so that we don't end up down a wrong path, spending time and energy on rules and regulations when we really should be focusing on bylaw change.
I think right now we need to focus on the bylaw changes. We've
Exactly.
got a bunch of rules and regulations already
I agree.
formulated, right? So let's not, well, I don't think we have to read every one of those things into a bylaw. I think we need to worry about the actual bylaw changes first.
Yep,
We'll
agreed.
have to figure out which one of them becomes a bylaw change, like if we need to change some regulation in the parking bylaw. That says something to the effect of, because we have a parking requirement. For a single family home, we have a parking requirement for a restaurant, we have a parking requirement, right? So there's no reason why somewhere along the line, we can't have parking requirements for short-term rentals.
Okay.
It'd be
So this has
another
to-
line in the parking
Through every part of the
zoning.
zoning bylaws, it's not just one
It's
subset.
not just one.
Right.
No.
You can sprinkle them out, absolutely, that's what I expect to see, actually.
Right, they could be all different sections. I think, so that's where we should be headed. We've got our miscellaneous rules and regulations pretty much mapped out.
Yes,
So
foundation.
let's work on what bylaw changes need to be made. And we'll decide whether or not whether we even agree on whether or not what the bylaw change should be. That's why we have a committee of 5. And we'll just vote on them.
Mr. Chairman, we have some hands up. Are we still?
Okay, so yeah, sure, let's take a couple more.
Vise has been up, I don't know. if
Yeah.
she's-
Yeah,
Bye.
No, that's an accident. You can
That's an
lower-
old hand?
Fine.
Okay.
That's an
Okay,
old hand.
I almost said that, just waving. Clark.
No, I think that was Terry.
I'm coming. I'm coming. Hi, I'm actually Terry Clark. Sorry. I just had a few
Address,
points that
Terry?
oh, yeah, sorry, 21 Furbush Road. And I just want to clarify, there are 2 Airbnbs on my street out of the 4 houses. The third one is considering it right now. So I just wanted to set that record straight. The other thing is I had a few points that I wanted to know if you had thought about I don't know if it's a zoning bylaw or if it's just an Airbnb rule. Is there any way we could just have so many Airbnbs in town?
Yes.
Instead of just randomly saying, oh, anybody who wants to do it can just buy a house and do it. That's one thing I thought of, if we only have so many in town and maybe only so many per person, because I know that there's a lot of realty companies and people doing things under different realty companies and stuff like that. And they're opening up more and more B&Bs. So like I know of one person who has at least like 9, at least so I've heard. And that's just a lot. Like, and I know that you were talking about sometimes the Airbnbs are a service to the town so that there is a place available for when people are having a funeral or a wedding, or it helps the venues in town when they're having all sorts of things. And I was wondering if, I mean, I know the one on my street, it's small, it's $375 a night. You times that by 30, that's over $11,000 a month. That's a lot of money. And that's not really a service anymore to help the poor townies, like who need a place for their family to stay when they come for a funeral or a wedding. That's kind of like a business. That's a lot of money. And when you think of $11,000 a month. So I think that it is a business because people are making so much money. I also wanted to know if you could obviously have owner occupied only, because for me, the 2 houses on my street are not owner occupied. And I know all you guys know that we've had some issues with people who rent. We've had town resources taken over because of a mental health issue. And we've also had the ambulance wasn't around for another town person who got hurt because they were here helping the people with a mental health issue. And yes, that night there were lights and a dog, and the police were all over my neighborhood. So yes, I was up on a Wednesday night, which wasn't really fun for my grandchildren the next day because they had to deal with me. And the last one is I know that Mr. Viviano was talking about investors in the town. And, you know, you consider investors being somebody who has like, you know, big, huge places. But I want to just clarify that this is Nahant and this is a small town. We have small town mentality. We have small houses. So a person who has like, say, 9 Airbnbs, in my opinion, and it's an investor. Whether you're under a realty company, whether you have it under your name, whether you have it under your mother's name or your father's name or your brother or sister's name, if it's really yours, you're an investor in this town and everybody knows it. I'm just saying, like, this is Nahant. Everybody knows everybody else's business. And I also would again reiterate that when you're doing the rules and regulations for the Airbnbs, please consider the worst case scenarios, because you're going to have transients every night. I have transients every night on my street in 2 different houses. And the worst case scenario has happened once. It's going to happen again. And that's what I need you to focus on, the worst case scenario, not the best case where everybody's happy and they all go to bed at 9 o'clock, because that's not real. I can tell you honestly from our experience, it ain't real. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Okay, is that it? in the public
One thing
area?
I'd like to comment, a few people called into the planning board or attended the planning board. One attendant here called in early and said, let them stay for free, then it's okay. Money is quickly calculated. These Airbnbs mostly around here have, you can go on Airbnb and click on any single one of them and see the nights available. They rent at about 50% occupancy. You're paying all the utilities, you're furnishing the place. It's a different form of renting. You can search anything on the internet and see it cast in any variety of light. But I would like to shine the light on the fact, like I said, I think we've received a few emails. Someone definitely called in the planning board and said, hey, look, in the summertime, I do get some residual income to help pay my bills. That kind of keeps me afloat through the winter. There's not, there's not people out there renting their house, renting a portion of their house, doing whatever, getting rich. When you break the numbers down to this, it's just like anything else. It finally balances out, so. That's one thing I prepared for the planning board. I'd be happy to do it for here. The overall, like I said, I went on and kind of looked at every unit, the average nightly rental, how many nights they appear to be rented, so on and so forth. But it's pretty different, I don't, the town could have a problem of getting overrun. Personally, what you see for interest, unless that wedding venue doubles its size again, I see these things dying off more and more. It's a beautiful place, it's lovely to come here in the summer, but you could drive 20 minutes and I don't think you could find a better place, but if you look online, you could drive 20 minutes and find something comparable. That you can go stay there in a hotel, stay there closer to transportation, so. There's a big back number to the numbers that go into it.
Okay, thank you, Steve. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
All those in
Second.
favor say aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned at 9:05. Thank you, gentlemen.
Good night, guys.
Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, everyone.
You bet.
It will come with. What we're attached to it is coming back in 2 weeks with bylaw change recommendations.
Correct. Yeah, because if we sit here and just